Are you looking to improve your deadlift? Well, I'm gonna give you everything you need today from a preparation standpoint, technical standpoint, errors, and programming so you can master your deadlift and hit a new PR. Let's get to it. Hey there, Brent Slate here from Thirst Gym, and today I'm gonna help you improve your deadlift primarily through these 4 aspects today. Now, it's not gonna be an exhaustive list. Chances are, whether you're a beginner to an advanced lifter, something I'm gonna give you today is gonna help you improve your deadlift and get the ball rolling so you can hit, ideally, your best deadlift in the coming weeks and months. I'm gonna be honest, I hate the deadlift. I was never good at it. It was never my strong suit lift. It always gave me problems when it came to competing in powerlifting. And overall, it's just a generally higher risk exercise versus reward, depending upon what you're trying to do, especially from an athletic performance standpoint. However, the deadlift is a big 3 exercise. It is crucial. If you compete in powerlifting, you obviously have to do it. And in my days, I've competed in both conventional and sumo, so I've done both, so I know the technical aspects of both to be able to do them at a high level. I deadlifted over 500 pounds at 130 pounds body weight in both stances, so I was successful at both of them. My heaviest competition deadlift being 510, and that was being sumo. Now, saying that means I've had to scratch and claw to get every pound out of my deadlift, okay? So I know what it's like to look at a lot of uphill battles, to be able to do your best and to be able to add poundage to that. Some people are genetically gifted to where their deadlift just soars and soars for quite some time until they actually hit a roadblock. And there's some people where the deadlift is always a work in progress, someone like myself. So regardless of where you fall in that camp, I'm sure today I'm gonna help you. So let's get into what you can do to improve your deadlift. All right, to get started, we're first going to talk about the preparation aspect of the deadlift. And in this particular category, there's 4 main things I want to talk about. One is going to be anatomy, not necessarily so much the muscles that are used. I'll talk about that a little bit, but almost individual-based anatomy, how you can use the way that you're built to maybe give you some ideas of what you can do from a technical aspect, but also improve your leverages because it is a very big leverage-based exercise. We're going to talk about the stances, kind of going into that, mobility and what kind of mobility you might need to be able to maximize those stances and some key areas you might want to focus on if you're having issues, and the equipment that you need to be able to lift the most amount of weight. And then, from a powerlifting perspective, what is kind of yay or nay. So from an anatomy perspective, the deadlift is a full body exercise. It is primarily going to work the posterior chain, the lower body, and a lot of the back. You're not going to see a whole lot of like chest activation and things like that, but having strong glutes, hamstrings, quads to make a big push off the floor if you are conventional or sumo, they do play a role to some degree. I want to make sure we obviously have a strong low back and a strong upper back to be able to maintain the position, and a strong midsection and trunk. So all of those things are kind of what's involved. Basically, if you look at the whole back side of the body, that's going to get a lot of the work done in our deadlift. Now, from an anatomy perspective, the sumo, and going to the stances a little bit, the sumo and the conventional are going to be a personal preference, but you're going to find that the way that you're built can maybe give you some ideas of where you should go from a stance perspective. So generally speaking, those that are incredibly mobile, especially about the hips, if you can get a wider stance, then that can obviously lend you to being more advantageous towards sumo, because you're then going to shrink the range of motion that you have to pull the weight, regardless of your arm length. So if you're very mobile, usually what you see a lot of women, especially lighter waist women, go with sumo. They have the mobility to get in a wide stance and maintain that position throughout the whole duration of the lift. The other thing you'll see too is those that with incredibly long arms, okay, will also usually go conventional. And the reason that is because their arms are so far down their legs that the best leverage they're going to get to pull that barbell is going to be in a conventional stance. They're going to have a big, strong lever arm to be able to pull that because of where their arms are. So like someone like me, my hands are towards my pockets. I have to bend down way further to get to the barbell. So therefore sumo is better because I can then decrease that range of motion. But if you have long arms, sumo can still work great. But if you have really long arms and especially shorter legs, then the conventional can give you that leverage that you need to be able to do that, especially when we're talking about a short torso, okay? The short torso and the long arms is going to be the perfect combination to pull conventional, or if you happen to be incredibly big. So if you are very big, talking about 275 plus, you'll see a lot of those guys generally pull conventional because getting into a sumo-based position is usually a little bit more challenging for them and doesn't optimize their leverages because of how big they are. They kind of get in their own way in the middle of their body, where with conventional, especially if you've got any kind of gut or upper body size here, when you go down to conventional, that's gonna recoil up like a spring, okay? So you'll have to play around, but from a powerlifting perspective, if you just look at most lifters in your weight class, that's gonna give you an idea of where you should probably start, but use these guidelines to also give you an idea of where you wanna start, and then play around with it and find what works best. Like I said, I started with conventional because it's really kind of all I knew, and then I eventually went on to switching to sumo because, again, my arms are so short, my torso length is kind of average, and my leg lengths are really short. So to decrease that range of motion so I could lift the most amount of weight, sumo made sense long term. Now, from a mobility perspective, I kind of talked about if you are very mobile at the hips, then sumo can work great. You do want to have adequate hip mobility, especially for sumo. So focusing on that would be, a very high priority if you don't have good hip mobility. You also want to make sure you have a decent amount of ankle mobility regardless of stance, and you also want to have a decent amount of hamstring mobility as well regardless of stance. You are going to want to have more adductor-based mobility given for sumo versus conventional. So the big difference would be if you are conventional, hamstring mobility is going to be a little bit more important than probably about anything else. And if you go sumo, hip and especially adductor mobility is going to probably be a little bit more important. You don't need a ton of shoulder mobility, at least quote unquote, looking at the deadlift, so you don't have to worry about that as much, but you want to have a strong upper back. So you don't want to have any kind of like shoulder issues. And the ankle mobility, especially for the sumo, will allow you to be able to sit into your hips more unless you optimize that stance. And from a conventional standpoint, will actually let you make sure that you're not up on your toes when you're going to push through your deadlift. So, again, as long as you're checking ankle mobility, hip mobility, for the most part, you're going to be okay, and just adjust it based on your stance. And then from an equipment standpoint, to lift the most amount of weight, we want to make sure that, one, you're probably using a belt, and it's not necessarily to quote unquote protect your back, but to increase your abdominal pressure that you create a better brace, it's going to get better force transfer. I'll have a link in the description box below about everything to know from a trunk perspective and a breathing and bracing perspective to give you some help on that. But the other thing too is that you want to make sure you're probably deadlifting in flat shoes or no shoes at all. Consult your federation of what is legal if you compete in powerlifting. Outfitters training, do what you prefer, but flat soled shoes will get you as close to the ground as possible. Again, decreasing the range of motion, but also optimizing the amount of force that you can push into the ground. And then from I guess you could call this anatomy, I guess a little bit, maybe equipment, but hook grip is fantastic if you can do it because it will be more even, but you can also go with a double over or a mixed grip, which works best for you. Most people are tending to go towards hook grip if at all possible. Just know that from a competition standpoint, you can't use any kind of straps or anything to aid your grip. Chalk is obviously fine, but you can't use any kind of device to improve your ability to hold on to that. That's really all you need from an equipment standpoint to maximize your deadlift. All right, now that we got the preparation side all done, let's talk about the coaching side, okay? So these are gonna be things that you're gonna wanna do basically from a setup perspective, everything that you can do to maximize your deadlift before you even pull the bar, okay? So let's first talk about your feet position. Conventional, obviously your feet are going to be together. Sumo, your feet are going to be wider. When it comes to conventional, we want to make sure that our feet are right underneath our hips or slightly wider. The bigger you are, you can get away with this. Let your actual hip and shoulder anatomy and structure dictate this. Okay, you don't want to necessarily always have them right together, and you don't necessarily want to be kind of in limbo land. Find a place you can create a big push from the floor from a conventional standpoint. You still want to make sure your feet are completely flat and you're able to load your hips and your knees are slightly going out from that position. Sumo is going to be the exact same thing, but we're going to be in a wider stance, but our feet are going to be slightly turned out. Again, about a 20 to 30 degree angle is a place to start. And then as we do that, we want to make sure that our knees continue to track out with our arms coming straight down so we can load our hips. We're in a much more vertical position. We're going to look like we're in a very high squat position. Key thing here though, from a feet perspective, is finding what's comfortable for you with your given anatomy, but also making sure that, again, whole foot contact is on the ground and that we can feel our heel, our big toe, and our pinky toe area to be able to grab that floor and maximize our foot pressures, and that's going to set you up for success more so than anything else. Everything else is somewhat individualistic based on you, so you will need to play with it to find what works best. When it comes to your grip, I already kind of talked about the hook grip and the mixed grip. Those are basically how you're going to hold the barbell, ideally to lift the most amount of weight. But where you're going to put it is again going to be dependent on how you're built, kind of going back to your feet position. So conventional, your hands are obviously always outside of your body. Ideally, you want them as close to your body as you can while you're doing that, because that's going to decrease the amount of range of motion that you have to pull the barbell. The wider you get, so if you think about a snatch or snatch grip, that range of motion is much bigger. So get them as close as you can from a conventional standpoint. From a sumo perspective, you just want your hands to go straight down, okay? You don't want to bring them in, you don't want to bring them out. Fine, just put your arms straight down, go into your setup, and that's going to be the most optimal, regardless of how you're built, because again, that's going to be the shortest distance that the bar can move. From a tension perspective, we want to be able to create as much full body tension, both from a breathing and bracing perspective, engaging our lats, making sure that our body is completely tight so that we move as a unit with that barbell. If we are not creating maximal tension, then we see the yanking of the barbell, the body rounds over, you're losing force, injuries can occur more likely. The tighter and more tension that you can create with a deadlift to become one with the barbell from the floor is going to do everything that you can possibly do to maintain all your technical positions. And for a lot of people, when they break down in their deadlift, the reason things break down is because tension gives. That can be technical, that can be muscular, that can be mental, that can all vary. But your deadlift is usually going to fail more so from a tension perspective than anything else. And then we're going to talk about the position, okay? We want to always make sure that the hips are high, regardless of whether we're going with a conventional or a sumo. We don't want to squat the weight up. We do want to leg press it up from a conventional standpoint, but we don't want to be in a deep squat leg press position. We want our hips as high as possible, our arms as long as possible, like they're big long hooks. So we go to grab that barbell, we have a optimized leverage to be able to pull that barbell off the ground. And so as long as you get your hip position correct with that tension, that usually gives you the best starting position that you can potentially have to lift the most amount of weight. So check all these, and this is going to basically get you to the barbell so that everything can take place, so that now we can actually talk about the execution aspect of the deadlift and break some of those things down to be able to aid where you might be having issues once that barbell actually is moving, especially at maximal lifts. All right, now that you're all set up, let's talk about what you can do during the lift to maximize these things and kind of step-by-step what's happening. We're going to talk about the leg drive, keeping the bar close, the transition phase, and once that barbell breaks, getting around the knees, that's incredibly important. The lockout, finishing the lift, and common errors that I see when it comes to the deadlift. Now, these 5 things are generally going to set up the full execution aspects. If you can get all these, you're probably going to be a pretty damn good deadlifter. And these are technical things that you're going to make sure that you focus on. If you want to see me talk about some of these and actually demonstrate them more, I'm going to have a link in the description box below giving you the top 5 things that can improve your deadlift if you want to actually visually see me go over some of this. But from an education standpoint, I think even just talking about these will be enough to be able to give you an idea to immediately see improvements. So the first thing is going to be leg drive. When it comes to the deadlift, we want to think about pushing just as much as we do pulling. Everybody calls it a pull or a big pull exercise. They're not wrong. You're pulling the barbell off the ground. But using your legs to create that big push is then going to help you maintain your torso position and actually get as much tension as we talked about earlier to do that. So yes, you are pulling the bar, but as you are pulling that bar, as you're wedging, you also want to think about creating a push, okay? So it is a pull and a push combination that's going to maximize getting that barbell to break off the ground initially. You also want to keep that barbell close. Hey, now it doesn't necessarily have to be all the way up against your shins. That's a kind of one of the errors here is that people think you have to be all the way touching the barbell every single time. You probably want a little bit of space, okay? You don't want to necessarily have it too far away, obviously, but the closer you can keep that barbell, the better to a degree. And the big way to tell here is that if you're neither coming over the barbell and you go down and you're pushing the barbell forward as you grab the barbell, then you're too close. But if you can get in your setup, keep your shins relatively vertical, grab that bar and pull yourself into position, and that bar can come straight in a path once it gets to the knees, then you're in a good spot. If you happen to have really big quads, you're a really big squatter, or a very big person just in general, generally you are going to find that you do need a little bit more space away from the barbell because you are going to have to take that into account of where that barbell is going to be. You also want to try to be consistent with where you're putting it. So for most people, I usually recommend starting at that first shoelace that's closest towards your toes to where you put that barbell to where you can see it, and then adjust from there, slightly closer, slightly farther. If you feel like the barbell is staying out in front of you as you have to go to lock out, then you clearly need to get closer. If it's constantly dragging up against your body too much, then you're creating unwanted friction, and it may be, that you're too close to the barbell. So, but if in doubt, have the barbell closer. And you can do that by your setup, but also engaging your lats and keeping that bar as close as possible during the whole lift. Now from a transition phase, so let's say that we've got that barbell, we're in a good leg drive position, our hips are high and strong, we're keeping the barbell close, that barbell breaks off the floor. The issue that everybody usually has, especially from a conventional standpoint, more so than sumo, but is getting around the knee. And this is common in weightlifting as well. Anytime you're doing a pull variation, how you navigate around the knees or that transition is going to set you up for a lot of success for your lockout or leave you in a really bad spot. So each phase kind of builds into itself, because if you don't have the barbell close, you're gonna have a hard time transitioning, which means you're never gonna lock it out. If you keep the barbell close, now we just gotta make sure we can optimize that transition, and then we'll be good at lockout. But if I still say be close, but I don't optimize that transition, I won't lock it out, okay? So a lot of lockout issues can be fixed by adjusting where the barbell's at from a setup perspective and being in the right position, keeping the barbell close, and or the transition aspect of getting to the knee so that we can optimize where our hips go when we get there. Now the transition aspect is going to be right below the kneecap, and depending when you're super unconventional, that's usually going to be the longest lever arm, okay? The hardest position. That's why so many people have issues with it, because of that, how far away, that's where the bar is the furthest away from the body, from the hips, okay, regardless of the way you pull. So addressing the lockout can't help, but if you are too far rounded or too far forward when you go to do that, you're never going to get your hips through regardless of what you do on a maximal pull. So we want to make sure that our upper back tightness is also there, our lat tightness is there when we get to that transition aspect. So if that part's gone, you immediately know what you need to do. If your torso position is in the right spot and the bar is close and all that is taken care of, now we actually have to address a true posterior chain or lockout issue. Okay, there could be some technical stuff that's going on with the head. I'll talk about that here in a little bit, but generally speaking, you're actually going to want to develop the posterior chain to bring the hips through. Transition phase is what I would say the fastest part of the lift, because you don't have a whole lot of time to think about what to do technically. You either enter that position great, or you don't enter it great, or you exit in a good position, or you don't. But if you can think about driving my hips forward, keeping the barbell close, bringing my hips to the barbell, as you go to do that, that transition will be much smoother. Now, for the lockout, I kind of talked about how these all go into that position. But usually once that barbell gets past the kneecap, if you're in a good position, your upper back is tight, your shoulders are where they need to be, all that is great, and you have the adequate strength, you're going to lock the weight out, okay? There's a reason why you can pin pull from above the legs so much more than you can deadlift, because you're in an optimal position to be able to lift the most amount of weight from a biomechanics standpoint, and you're in just a strong position from a posterior chain perspective. So that's why if you can get these down, you will lock the weight out. So you chances are just don't need to work on just the top end of your deadlift. Obviously, time under tension does come into account too when we talk about grips. If your grip's really weak, you can pull that barbell for like 3 or 4 seconds, and that could be an issue. Now, some common errors that I see, we've kind of addressed some of these as going through them, but from a leg drive perspective, the big one here is not creating enough tension. And so that big push then rounds, and then they're really in a rounded position. And when they're in a rounded position, now you're doing that ugly dead cat looking thing. So making sure your tension is there to maximize your deadlift. We talked about the close, having where you set the barbell up, having it too far away and whatever, kind of addresses some of itself. Now, something you can do to address that's not necessarily close, but windmilling is an issue, especially those with over-under grips. Usually if your barbell's windmilling on you, you probably need to take your underhand and slide it out about 1 inch or half an inch, somewhere around there, and that usually will eliminate your windmilling. So that's something that you can address from a minor technical aspect, but everything else still going to apply as normal. From a transition perspective, an error that I see is people's head position. So as they go to deadlift, you'll commonly see people keep their head up and they're craning through their neck. Not bad. Ideally, we want to have that head relatively neutral. I'm not going to tell you to look down, but you should be able to look down and forward towards like the corner of a wall and the ground, okay? You don't want to have it crane up here because yes, usually the lumbar spine is going to follow the cervical spine. So if I'm here, I'm going to arch through my back, and it's going to make it hard to get in that position, but I'm also going to probably rely on my low back quite a bit. If I bring my head more neutral, I can now sit into my hips a little bit more, and my back is in a better position to create a bigger push. But more importantly, when we get to the transition phase of that, if I'm craned here, okay, usually what happens is that the barbell is then, it might be close, but because I'm in that big anterior orientation or pelvic tilt, I am not able to optimize my glutes. I can't get my hips through. To optimize my glutes, I need to have a slight posterior tilt to be able to get a maximal glute contraction to meet the bar. So what you can do is take your head and start to drop it forward as you pass those knees, because your lumbar spine will follow your cervical. So if you bring your head down, then your lumbar will slightly round. That's going to bring your pelvis underneath you a little bit more, and now you're going to be able to actually engage your glutes and finish your lockout, which is why you want to finish here, okay? That's why people, when they get to the very top, if they're like this, they never get their hips through because their lumbar and their cervical is stuck in extension. Then you bring that head down, you're going to be able to bring your hips forward to lock that weight out, and that is for sumo or conventional. Those are usually the biggest issues that I see, so like yanking the bar, you know, not having enough tension, the transition phase of it, and that usually fixes most people's deadlifts. All right, now's what we really got to talk about when it comes to the deadlift is the mental aspect, okay? The deadlift is one of the most mentally taxing lifts. It is going to require a lot of mental fortitude. And because unlike the squat and the bench press, there is no eccentric aspect that starts the exercise. You've got to rip that barbell off the floor, as they say, grip and rip. Now, the first thing I want you to understand when it comes to deadlift is the mindset, okay? You have to be, especially for heavy weights, you have to be mentally locked in and focused because you've got to get that barbell moving, okay? It's not about just lifting the weight like a squat going down and up. You have to have more than enough strength to get that barbell from a complete dead stop, hence the name, to continue to rise all the way to lockout. And for many people, when that weight is heavy, it may take what feels like an eternity for that barbell to break off the floor. So having the mental fortitude to keep pushing through the floor, pulling, keeping a hold of that barbell, keeping it close, all your technical cues right, is much harder than many of the other lifts because you can create all that tension, and you should, with your setup, just like you would with your squat and your bench press. Maintaining it when the barbell is not moving is much more challenging from a mental perspective. So you've got to be locked in when it comes to that aspect and be prepared for that aspect, because if you are going to be taking attempts at weights that you haven't done before, that's what it's going to feel like. We also going to have the technique aspect of it, the mental. How you practice and how you train is then going to come into the meet day or taking big weights. Because people get so hyped up for the deadlift, one, because it's the end of a powerlifting meet, because it, again, usually sometimes a lot of meets are dictated off of your deadlift performance to be able to beat other people or to win money, to hit PR totals, things like that, or just to be able to get hyped up and go pull that in training, right? The ability to practice that technique over and over and over and over means that it can be more consistent and ritual to where when you turn it on, you don't have to think about it as much. I would still argue you still have to do this with the squat and the bench press, but the deadlift is where usually people will get absolutely ate up mentally in terms of like going to attack a weight and rip it off the ground. And you can see that some people get so hyped up, they put themselves in piss poor technical positions. So don't let that be you. Understand that how you train and getting your technique right, but then having the mental fortitude and mentally thinking about what needs to happen from a technical perspective while you're amped up is very difficult. So the more you can practice it so that it's second nature, that it just naturally happens, the better off you're going to be, more so the deadlift, in my opinion, than almost any other lift. And then the other thing is going to be treating light weights like they're heavy and treating heavy weights like they're light. When it comes to the deadlift, I am a huge proponent of this, because if you treat light weights like they're heavy, you're going to pull that freaking weight fast off the floor, develop a lot of rate of force development. You are going to really give that weight the respect it deserves, okay? And for many people, that can also help prepare you for the heavier lifts that come, and it gives you more of that mindset work and a technical practice because you're constantly treating it like that. On the other side of the coin as well, treating heavyweights like they're light means that you know that this should be quote unquote easy. You should give it the respect again, but because it's light, you should go in knowing I'm going to get this weight. This is going to be easy. This is another day for me. Don't overthink it, okay? And the deadlift, again, is one of those things because, again, we know that getting that barbell to break from a mental aspect and technical aspect can be very challenging. So if you go by this old school powerlifting motto, it serves you very well when it comes to the deadlift, and it will usually do a lot of things for you. The other thing from a mental side for the deadlift is many people are going to find that they miss weights more consistently at this lift than any other lift because the repercussions of missing a lift is letting it go, okay? Your chances of seeing self-harm, you don't need spotters, the bar's not gonna drop on your face or your chest, or your arms are gonna break, or you're gonna tear a pec, or you're gonna tear a quad, or get folded into a rack, right? Or fall backwards with 500-600 pounds. Those are all legitimate concerns when it comes to squat and bench press. Deadlift, if you can't get the weight, you just let it go, okay? And so from a mental perspective, that usually lets you be more aggressive when it comes to making training attempts, but also meet and competition-based attempts. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you do need to understand that your ability to mentally make the right decisions in training, especially if you're following an RP-based program, is incredibly important because it can lead you to overtraining, but your mental approach is just different because of those factors, okay? There are much less risks involved by taking a PR attempt, especially in training consistently, versus a squat or a bench press, especially if you happen to be training by yourself. All right, now let's talk about some errors and how you can fix them. I've kind of addressed some of these, but I'm gonna go into a little bit more detail. So the first big error, and probably the most common that you see on like social media or anything, is the rounding, especially the low back rounding, okay? We don't want that to have that happen, and so the way that you fix that is one, creating the amount of tension and wedging, okay? As much tension and wedging as you can is going to help you lock in that position, keeping your lats as tight as possible so that your chest is in a strong position. You're gonna keep that barbell in as close as you possibly can and move as a unit, and that will address majority of your rounding. Now, if you happen to consistently always round, no matter what you do, I'll have a video in the description box below that can help you with that. But if you're constantly doing that, that usually can also mean too that your lower body is not up to snuff with your low back strength. Not always, but especially in beginners, they don't understand how to utilize their legs, but they also usually neglect their leg training early on in their training career. And so they're used to just using their low back to do everything. So those are kind of the big things that I would look at there. The other one's going to be your hips. And in general, by hips, I mean bringing the bar to you or your hips to the bar, okay? Constantly trying to figure out how to get that lockout strong is going to be a big issue. But as I mentioned earlier, entering the position around the knee, that transition phase, is of most importance first and foremost because it's going to let you maximize that. So your start position off the ground, creating as much tension, and navigating around the knees successfully will do everything that you need to do to maximize your lockout, okay? Still develop your general hip extension through training means. I'm not gonna say don't do that, but if you do all those other things, the lockout will take care of itself. Now the bar drift kind of again goes hand in hand with this as well. If you're able to keep your lats tight and keep that tension in spot, that barbell will stay closer to you. You still want to make sure you're pushing through your whole foot. You're still relatively heel heavy. You don't want to push through your toes. Stay relatively heel heavy, again, regardless of what stance you use, and that will keep the barbell in as close as you possibly can. The last one's going to be hitching, okay? Hitching kind of stems from, again, not having the right start position and tension in navigating around the knee more so than anything else. Because what happens is people usually get to the knee and they're in a bad position, and now they're like, what do I do? And so they either hitch and scoop underneath it, or they do the shake thing and then the bar sits on them, or they actually manage to like scoop their body out underneath it, but as they go to do it and they lean back, now their knees are not locked out, okay? And now they're having a hard time getting their knees locked out because they're having to do like a big leg extension, okay? So my suggestion for hitching is a lot of what it is to fix rounding and generally bring your hips towards the bar. that will fix a lot of your hitching issues. You also just want to make sure that you don't get in a bad habit of doing this, okay? If you do it a couple times early, remedy and get to it early, because if you get used to having that big long pull scoop thing, you're going to be wanting to do that over and over and over throughout your training and career. If you can focus on the technical aspect and get into the right positions and develop the strength in those positions early, hitching usually goes away pretty well, and you can keep it at bay pretty well by doing all that stuff. If you do still feel like you're having a hard time, which there are people, it does happen, that you're having a hard time at that lockout, that you're doing things that are focusing on quality glute contractions, you're feeling your glutes actually doing the hip extension. You know, I'm still a big fan of like good mornings and things like that. I'm not going to say I'm not, but reverse hypers, 45-degree back extensions, and back extensions off the glute ham raise are great exercises that you can do to get enough length, but also really control the reps and really feel your glutes doing the work and get that mind-muscle connection, so that when you need to get those hips involved, you're able to do so to minimize that hitching. All right, now let's talk about what everybody wants to probably hear about, and that's programming of the deadlift. And so let's talk about what we can do to address weakness off the floor, weakness around the knee or the midsection, or weakness of the lockout. Now, for most people, weakness off the floor can stem from a couple of things. It can stem from not enough leg strength to get the barbell actually moving off the floor. It can also stem from the ability to create enough tension. So if you have a really weak grip, that can cause technical breakdowns and prevent the barbell from moving. Not as common, but it is a legitimate concern for very strong people. Hook grip will usually get rid of a lot of that. And the other thing from weaknesses from the floor can also be your back strength, okay? Being able to upper back, keep that in position from the floor. So for the floor-based work, most people are going to tell you to focus on pause deadlifts and deficit deadlifts, almost more so than anything. I've talked extensively how I'm not a fan of pause deadlifts. I'll have a link to that video in the description box below as well if you want to hear more about that. But I am more of a fan of deficit deadlifts, very small, like 1 to 2 inches at the most. I'm a big fan of pulling against bands and or chains to focus on rate of force development and speed from the floor. And then I'm also a big fan of Boris deadlifts. Okay, those are kind of the exercises that I drift towards to address weakness off the floor, because some of this can be technical, and a lot of times it can be, but because we need to work on getting that barbell to break off the floor, the deficit is going to have you be at a bigger range of motion. So it's going to focus more on that push or that leg drive, regardless. Again, sumo or conventional, doesn't matter, still focuses on that. And then the accommodating resisting piece, from like a dynamic effort perspective, you get enough weight on there in bands and chains. It's going to teach you, again, going back to treating heavy weights like they're light and light weights like they're heavy. It's going to teach you to really own that light weights like they're heavy and pulling fast as you possibly can against that band tension or chain tension. And by being able to wedge in position, get more technical practice, and work on that rate of force development using general sports performance-based means, that's going to immediately help your ability to get the barbell off the floor. That's why I like that. And the Boris deadlift I like as well, because it's going to give you those those pushing practice by getting in position and then getting it up to the knee and coming back down. You're not really doing anything else. You're literally just working on that bottom half and not only position, but creating those pushes. So those are kind of like my big three there. When it comes to the mid position, this is where you're gonna have to focus again on getting around the knee. So we wanna make sure that our mid back and our upper back and our low back are incredibly strong. So this is usually where I start favoring good mornings and snatch grip deadlifts or snatch grip RDLs for sure, because it's going to enhance and improve our upper back strength and positioning there. You can also do pin lay rows and things like that. I think those are very fair as well. But generally speaking, those are kind of my big go-to things when it comes around the knee. The other one that you can do here as well is the Dimmel deadlift, especially against bands. It's absolutely miserable, but that's going to teach you how to get your knees out of the way and be explosive. It's also going to help your lockout, but it's going to teach you how to get your knees out of the way, own that position, and get in a lot of time under tension as well. So those are kind of the ones that I like to get around the knee. The Boris can help a little bit to get there, but you're never really going to truly finish it. And the final exercise I like here is going to be a chair deadlift, okay? The chair deadlift absolutely sucks, but it's going to, again, address that upper back position. It's going to hammer the hips hard, and it's going to teach you how to navigate that knee from a sitting position. So give the chair deadlift a shot. It fixes a ton for a majority of people when it comes to their deadlift. And when it comes to the lockout, talked about excessively how important technique is when it comes to the lockout, more so than anything else. I think positioning handles a lot of it. But if you do have a legitimate weakness, we already talked about find that mind-muscle connection through accessory exercises that you can actually feel your glutes do the work. But when it comes to big bang for your buck movements, I do like doing RDLs. And while I know that can work on a lot of this, that's going to let you get a very, very heavy hip hinge pattern. It's also going to let you train eccentrically so that you can get those glutes and hamstrings incredibly strong. You can do high block or pin pulls as well. My recommendation here is, again, to start around the knee height and really making sure that you can actually get your hips through. If you can do things against band tension, I think it's even better because it will teach you to meet the bar harder and accommodate that strength curve. I think that's a big perk there. And then you could also just do regular deadlifts consistently with bands or chains because it's going to accommodate that strength curve and give you more tension at the top, especially heavier max effort work. That for sure will do it for you because it will teach you how to fight through that lockout, through all those positions that we talked about, and you're just going to see a lot of benefits there. All right, the final piece we got to talk about here from programming is going to be volume, intensity, and frequency when it comes to your deadlift. Now, you're going to hear probably a wide range of things here, but there are some common themes when it comes to the deadlift. The first is going to be, because there is no eccentric loading to begin the lift, that's going to make it pretty hard. I'm talking about from a mental perspective, but being able to get that barbell to break the ground. So you're going to find that your intensity is just generally going to have to be higher from like a mental perspective, but you're also going to find that you're not able to train the intensity as frequently as possible as you can, say, your squat and your bench press. Now, for me personally, every time I deadlifted heavy, my body was wrecked for days. It didn't matter if I did volume, it didn't matter if I did intensity, it didn't matter what recovery means I did. My body never recovered well from it. Again, I'm not built well for it. So if you're built well for it, you might be able to manipulate your volume and your frequency and your intensity a little bit more than somebody that does not recover well from it. Also, the stronger that you are, okay, Louis has said it probably a million times in the past, is that good deadlifters are usually just good deadlifters, okay? There's some people that can just walk into a gym and automatically deadlift 500 pounds on the first day, and there's other people that fight and claw to get to that number, okay? Some people are just built better for it and wired differently for it. It's just the way that it is, okay? It's like I'm built to squat and bench press much more than I am to deadlift. That's always going to come into your recovery game. But we're going to talk about, in general, what should you be considering. So generally when it comes to the deadlift, usually your frequency is going to be the lowest of the big three. And so usually it means you can get away with 1 to 2 times per week, and that's really about all you need. I think you should never go past 2 times a week of deadlifting ever. I don't see any benefits there. Most people are going to be the most successful with 1 time a week of actually deadlifting, and then you can put in a secondary pull or hinge exercise like an RDL or a good morning or something like that to continue to build your deadlift and not bang your body up so much, okay? Therefore, the volume also doesn't have to be as high, okay? I know it seems kind of counterintuitive. Generally, if your frequency is lower, usually your volume is higher, but because of that repetition of how hard that weight is and that exercise is to be able to recover from, we don't want the volume as high either. Because if we crank the volume up and how hard it is to recover when, compared to the other lifts, that digs us a pretty big ditch. So for most people, again, I think if you're doing anywhere from about 8 to 12 actual quality lifts, I mean quality lifts in a week of your deadlift, of heavy work, you're gonna be fine, okay? Now, if you start sprinkling in dynamic effort work with this, maybe a conjugate stuff, that can change. But for most people, if you're getting 8 to 12 quality sets in a week, that's more than enough, okay? That's including like building up into your top sets, back offs, all that kind of stuff, okay? Usually you may even find it less, but I think that's like the very top end. The 8's probably like the common aspect of it, especially when you start adding in different variations to build into your deadlift that would count towards that, okay? If you're still deadlifting, it still counts as a deadlift variation and something you think about from a training perspective. And then the intensity, you know, I've found that most people, because the intensity when it gets pushed harder, you can't do the frequency as often and obviously can't do as much volume. But I do think that the intensity does need to be trained. So I personally am more of like a high and low guy, to where either through weeks or throughout the sessions, you either have high intensity and low intensity based days, and you just go back and forth and touch those, whether it's throughout the course of weeks. You can go every couple weeks, but you just want to make sure that you're not having multiple high sessions over and over. So you can, if you're deadlifting twice a week, then you want a high RPE day and probably a low RPE day. If you're just having one deadlift session a week, then you can probably have one high week that's pretty hard and then probably a low to medium week, and you can go back and forth. That's going to optimize your recovery a little bit better because of how long it can take you to recover from that. It also can bleed into other lifts, so make sure that you take that into account as well, especially when it comes to the squat. The benefit is that a lot of squat exercises, especially accessory exercises, can aid your deadlift, and I think that's a benefit, is that you can get away without having to deadlift as much because there's so much transference there, especially if you start looking at things like front squats and box squats and good morning variations. Those carry over well to both lifts regardless of what you do, so you can see some bleed over there. They let you get away from not having as much frequency and volume from the deadlift. So it, to me, is one of the most crucial things that you find what works best for you. I had to experiment with it myself as well. I ran the conjugate system for years in terms of my competing and had very strong success with it. One of the biggest tweaks I made was adjusting the deadlift. I only deadlifted heavy every other week on dynamic effort days, and I would speed pull the other weeks. And that let me recover from session to session. I banked on my squat and my accessory works to drive up my deadlift, hammered the position stuff, use the dynamic effort work to work on the technical aspect, and the heavy days to address what I needed to work on from a heavy perspective and picking the smart variations there. So a mix of that will work. I want you to just take home these kind of general guidelines that I've found to be successful for the majority of my clients and myself over the years. So there you have it. That's going to wrap up everything you need to know to help you improve your deadlift from a technical side, from a training side, from a programming side, to addressing weak points. You name it, I've covered everything that you need here. Now, if you have any specific questions, I'd be more than happy to answer those in the comment section below, give you some more detailed and nuanced answers if you can. This video is probably already long enough as is, and I don't want it to bleed any longer. I'm trying to give you a good guide in the right direction, because chances are there's something that can help you with your deadlift that you took from this video. You're just gonna have to find it and apply it. But N always equals 1. Everybody is different, and these are just the things that I found that have worked well, not only from a technical and programming perspective, but also from a mental perspective as well. Because again, the deadlift was one of the exercises that I was the worst at in all my training career, and I still hate it to this day. Therefore, it's made me have to think a lot more about how to get better at it. So I've probably thought of every conceivable notion that you can think of how to get better at deadlifting, because it just was not my bread and butter. So if you happen to take one awesome thing away from today's video that you're gonna implement in your training, do me a favor, hit that like button, leave me a comment, let me know what it is. Share with a friend, subscribe. I'd really appreciate all that, and I'll see you at the next video.